Welcome one and all to what is probably going to be the shortest video in this particular DLC review series. This is a weird subsection of Old World Blues to have to cover, because even though the expansion itself is generally packed with content and places to explore, there's basically only one side quest, and it's a fetch quest. For anyone unfamiliar with Old World Blues that's bothered to take to the New Vegas wiki, you might be tempted to try and correct me, saying, "What are you talking about, Loveless? There's 13 side quests. That's more than all the other DLCs combined." Alright, so, first of all, that's not an accomplishment, considering that Honest Hearts is the only other expansion with any side quests, having a total of 7, multiple of which were just brief dialogues with different characters. Second, Old World Blues has even more of these dialogue-only quests, and they're somehow worse, or at least on par with those of Honest Hearts. The dialogue-only side quests of Honest Hearts at least provided interesting dilemmas for the player to consider, and they were tied to the companions whom the player would naturally feel some connection with after having traveled together, which is how you unlock these quests to begin with. Deciding whether or not to tell Waking Cloud about the death of her husband, the decision to either influence or dissuade follows Chalk's curiosity of the outside world. Even though these choices didn't have any notable consequences outside the ending slideshow, the dilemmas themselves still had enough complexity to them to make the player stop and think. Of the 13 side quests, Old World Blues has a total of 6 that are only dialogue, and literally all of them are with the brains of the think tank. That means that nearly half of these supposed side quests in this expansion are just conversations. When it comes down to it, these quests serve to expand on the story of the scientists of the think tank. And for what it's worth, what the player can learn from these exchanges does feel like necessary information. Not even just because it alludes to the overarching narrative of the other courier that's been teased since before Dead Money, but because they collectively build on the mystery of what exactly is going on at Big Mountain, and effectively builds to the twist that Mobius has been keeping the brains confined to Big Mountain. It also adds some much needed character to these brains. Like I've said previously, by no means are they redeemable, but it's also not that difficult to find some level of pity for them, or at least a couple of them. Poor Dr. 8 is an audio specialist that has a broken voice box and can't communicate. Dala longs for the days of her humanity. O, or Zero, has been a pushover beta male his entire life. Klein is pretty irredeemable, but he's clearly not all there either. The same applies to Boros, though to a lesser extent, as Boros is far less cognizant of his surroundings, not even realizing that Cazadors can reproduce and have escaped Big Mountain. Like I said, it doesn't make them misunderstood villains or any cliche like that, but it does add to their depth adequately enough to earn those moments where the player may stop and go, huh, that really kinda sucks. I think the inclusion of all the dialogue that pertains to these quests is very good. It helps build on the lore of this already fascinating location, and it ties into the overarching story of the other courier that'll conclude with Lonesome Road. That's all fine and great, but why did they feel the need to turn these exchanges into their very own side quests that altogether can yield a pretty sizable chunk of XP? I could actually understand making a side quest out of the dialogue that pertains to the courier and Christine if it was obscure enough. It would almost be like its own little Easter egg, something that's really difficult to find, but then you look on the wiki and you're like, wait a minute, what the fuck's that quest? I didn't see that. But I don't really understand why they felt the need to qualify this stuff as side quests. And look, not every side quest needs to be as expansive and non-linear as Beyond the Beef or as involved as One for My Baby. I get it, the devs only had so much time and so many resources, but it's not as if the DLC's lacking content. You don't need to slap a side quest label on all these menial conversations. The next 4 side quests I want to discuss are all associated with the main quest objectives: upgrading the sonic emitter, upgrading the stealth suit, and putting down Gabe. But Loveless, I hear you say, that's only 3 objectives, but you said 4 side quests. You are correct, dear viewer. 2 of these side quests are to do with upgrading the sonic emitter. This goes beyond pointless, and I genuinely have no idea what I'm expected to assume that Obsidian was thinking when they structured things this way. All 4 of these so-called side quests could have been streamlined into optional objectives for the main quests. Hell, I've seen optional objectives in the base game side quests with more depth and engagement than these so-called side quests. What else is there that I can even say? It's just so pointless and not to mention confusing as to why they would dedicate side quest marks for these random objectives. The last three side quests are similar to the Sonic Emitter quests in that they all really should have just been merged into a single, longer quest. Unfortunately, this is just a series of fetches the player must do in order to unlock more techno personas in the sync, so it's ultimately very shallow and pretty lacking in creativity. All the player does is go to different parts of the map and grab a holotape. It's not even particularly interesting locations, it's just like, oh hey, it's in a little fucking cave here. Oh, there's a couple enemies, oh god, oh gee whiz. Though to be fair, this is the location of the best one, so, I'll give you that. It's really about as simple as it gets. However, even with all of that said, I loved the end result for this quest. The personalities of these machines are some of the most enjoyably silly characters to ever come from a Fallout game. The Central Intelligence Unit acts as a vendor for the courier, and it's this gaudy butler that lacks an upgrade that would allow it to refer to female characters as ma'am, instead only being able to refer to the player as sir regardless of their gender. The Autodoc is this charming but straight-shooting doc with a southern drawl, and he's probably the kindest of the bunch. He's a cool dude, I like him. The Biological Research Station is this smooth-talking hunk with a deep voice whose dialogue is riddled with innuendo about the insertion of seed. The two light switches act as jealous dames that like to gossip about one another and will openly flirt with the courier. The jukebox is oozing with charisma and sounds like a jazz musician straight out of 1950s Harlem. The book chute is a shameless anti-commie red-blooded imperialist that's keen on the eradication of all literature so as to prevent free thinking that leads to sedition. Muggy is a comically tiny Securitron that has a built-in obsession with coffee mugs. His existence is pain, though not as painful as the sink. No, not the entire area, I mean the actual faucet, which is not only painfully obsessed with cleanliness, but is revolted by the idea of dirt going down its drain, which I actually kind of understand that. And finally, easily the best of these personalities is none other than video gaming's most violent kitchen appliance, the toaster. This thing is fucking amazing. It's a narcissistic toaster with a Napoleon complex so extreme that it legitimately believes itself capable of being a death ray and wants to bring about a second Armageddon. It honestly doesn't get any sillier than this, and I'm all for it. These little characters are probably the peak of this DLC's attempts at comedy, but the personalities aren't just here for laughs. They have their own functions, albeit varying in their significance. The light switches, for instance, change the lighting of the rooms that they're in. Yeah, it's not exactly a game changer. The most useful of the lot, barring the Autodoc because, well, duh, is probably the sink, which will fill empty bottles with purified water, a resource that's useful regardless of whether or not hardcore mode is turned on. The majority of these devices, however, focus on rather specific forms of item conversion that feel a bit too niche to pay consistent mind to. The book chute, for instance, will turn ruined books into blank books, which can then be turned into skill books at a workbench with the right crafting materials. I suppose this could be useful for some scenarios, but by the time the players reached Old World Blue, unless they've come here extremely early on, most builds will be realized enough to lack for any need of this mechanic. The Biological Research Station doesn't really do much on normal difficulty, but it can be really useful on hardcore mode. By using Salient Green, which is found around the Big Empty, the player can grow different plants in the sink garden, including but not limited to the flora required to craft stim packs. The player can also exchange a number of plants to the station for Salient Green, so if you have some jalapeno peppers but you want maize, for instance, you can now turn one into the other fairly easily. And finally, there's Muggy, who turns coffee mugs, coffee pots, and plates into various crafting materials such as lead, scrap metal, and so on. How that physically works, I have no fucking idea. This is a bit niche, but he can also supply the player with 50 energy cells, 50 microfusion cells, and 5 pieces of scrap electronics. This is all after he's been upgraded, which you can do to all of the appliances throughout the sink. And that's a pretty sizable chunk of daily ammo for energy-spec'd couriers. So even though the quests to do with the sink appliances are just fetch quests, the rewards for gathering the personalities as well as their upgrades are honestly very much worth it. Between the spectacularly funny dialogue and the albeit rather niche utility of the appliances, the end result far exceeds the journey it took to get there. It's just kind of a shame that the side quests overall for this DLC are pretty lacking. I don't think it would be very reductionist of me to say that half of these were just dialogue, the following quarter were basically just optional objectives for the main quest, and the last quarter was just fetch quests. That's honestly pretty damn disappointing, and I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but it's about on par with how Honest Hearts handled its side quests. Honest Heart's side quests were very much lacking, and Old World Blues doesn't exactly set the bar going forward itself. But I guess that's all I have to say for the side quests. I apologize for the shortness of this video, but I really just don't have anything else to say about the side quests of Old World Blues. Thankfully, the next part of the series will be covering Big Mountain itself and the various elements of world building that litter the crater, which I actually consider one of this expansion's greatest strengths. So I'll see you then. Take care.